Hi and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and for taking your time to take part in this conversation, a conversation that is really close to our hearts as HR and payroll providers, again pertaining the changes that the government has implemented when it comes to our National Health Insurance Fund, formerly known as NHIF, which is now SHIF. And with me are our payroll and compliance experts to lead the conversation. We will take about 45 minutes just to go through what this means to you as an employer, what this means to you as an employee. Feel free to drop your questions on the Q&A session. We'll be taking them as they come. But allow me to introduce Tracy, who will moderate this session. She's a legal assistant at Workpay, and she is also quite knowledgeable about matters of compliance, and she will introduce our speakers for the day. My name is Jason Johi. I am the host of this webinar, and I'm excited about the conversation that you're having. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Jess. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in from, and welcome to today's webinar on the Social Health Insurance Fund and National Health Insurance Fund. My name is Tracy, as Jess has introduced me. I'm a lawyer and I'm part of the legal and compliance team here at Workpay, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We're excited to have you join us today to explore the transition from National Health Insurance Fund, NHIF, and to Social Health Insurance Fund, which is commonly referred to as SHIF. And we're going to be discussing one of the most trending topics and that's making the airwaves in Kenya right now. Why it affects us, why it matters, who is it for, the enrollment, the registration, and what have you. So to help us unpack that, we are joined by our expert speakers, Joshua and Nelson, who I will give a chance to introduce themselves, and then we can dive right in. So over to you, Joshua and Nelson.
Okay, great. I think I'll go first. My name is Nelson. I lead legal operations here at Workpay, and it's a pleasure to have all of you as we have this discussion about the Social Health Insurance Fund, and I look forward to having a great one or so hour with you.
Yes, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Joshua. I'm the payroll ops manager here at Workpay. It's a pleasure to engage with you and looking forward to a fruitful conversation. Back to you, Tracy.
Thank you. So maybe we can just begin by discussing the National Health Insurance Fund, NHIF. For over 5 decades in Kenya, the government has provided health insurance through this platform. And now this is a very pivotal moment for the health landscape in Kenya. And we're now moving, which is very unprecedented, and now we're moving to a new health insurance regime. So maybe Nelson, you can begin by explaining to us why the transition, maybe give us some background context on the National Health Insurance Fund and how we got ourselves here. Over to you. Hey, Nelson, are you with us? Okay. Let's give Nelson a few minutes I think we're having internet connectivity issues, but we're working on that. All right, maybe as we work on that, Joshua, with the context that we're going to go over at some point about NHIF, maybe you can give us an overview of the Social Health Insurance Fund. What's the mandate therein? What key differences are we looking at between NHIF and now SHIF? And maybe you could also walk us through the actual mandate of SHIF and how it's going to come into play, and also the key differences as earlier mentioned.
Yes, thank you, Tracy, for this opportunity. So yes, so when we have we migrated from NHIF to SHIF, I am sure people are curious what will be the difference. Yes, so maybe just to explain the background of what SHIF and NHIF are. So NHIF was a National Health Insurance Fund, which by its nature, it was computed on a graduated scale. So they will take your salary and subject it to a graduated scale that ranged from 0 up to 100,000, different bands. And the minimum amount that a person could have contributed under NHIF was 150. And the maximum was 1,700. So that was NHIF. And for SHIF now, it's a bit more different. For SHIF, the minimum contribution is 300, and employers are supposed to withhold 2.7% of an employee's gross salary. Take note of this, it's gross salary per month. And that is what will be termed as SHIF contribution. So that is basically the difference between the two. The other differences are more of operational in terms, and I think down the line Nelson will explain the differences between the two in terms of how they operate. But in terms of the contributions, that is basically the difference. And what we expect is that a lot of employees will feel the pinch, because remember that this 2.75 is uncapped. So that means for an employee who was earning 100,000, generally here the employee will be contributing 1,700. Now they'll have to contribute 2,700 per month. That is a huge difference. For a person whose salary is $1 million, that means they will have to part away with 27,500, which, as you know, in this case, it's uncapped. So it can go as high as your gross goes. And that is basically the difference between the two. Back to you, Tracy.
All right, thank you, Joshua. I think we're now beginning to see how this is going to play out. Thank you for the explanation. And it's very key for us to actually discuss this, because these are things that have come into effect from the first of this month. So something else that maybe we need to dive into, okay, the SHIF is there, it's coming to effect. Mm-hmm. What next? How are we enrolling? Is there migrating channel in which that we're going to make the transition? Internally, we've seen a lot of our clients and employees come and ask, how do I make the transition? Is there a registration platform? Of course, for fear of being non-compliant. So how are we, is there a particular way in which now we're going to move from NHIF to SHIF? And something else that maybe we need to take note of is that this conversation's happening in public sector, private sector, informal sector, and NHIF had been structured or designed in a way that it was mostly for the salaried bracket. So what about the non-salaried individuals? What happens? Is there also another transition or registration for them to be able to enroll into SHIF or SHIF?
Yes. So once the rollout happened, there were two things that were supposed to happen. The first one was for employers to actually register under the Social Health Authority on their portal. And the second one was for, what was expected is that employees and non-salaried individuals are supposed to register under the SHA. So for employers, what they're supposed to do is basically just follow a few steps. So the first one is just go to the sha.go.ke portal and have your CR12 with you and the KRA PIN with you, the company's KRA PIN. Those are the two documents you are required to have when registering for SHIF. Once you're there, you'll be required to update a few things. The first one is a email address for a personnel. So a personnel could be a director of the company first, and to another person who will be assisting in the filing. So that could be any other person, or just you can use the same director. So the other thing that you'll be required to do is actually update a phone number. Why is that important? Every time you'll be logging into this portal as an employer, the portal will be sending a one-time authentication password, OTP, through your phone number. So that's why a phone number is required, and make sure the phone number is very active. So that is all that is required from the employer side. For the employee, what happened is this. Kenyans being Kenyans, I think SHIF saw that most won't register. So what happened is that since they have your record on the NHIF, they just migrated everyone from NHIF to SHIF because they have all your details. So employees right now, employees who are salaried and who are under the National Health Insurance Fund are not supposed to register. You're already registered by virtue of being a former NHIF member. So, but there's something that is expected of you. That thing is updating the portal. So once you go to the portal under the employee sector, you'll be required to update details like your residency, area of residency, your ID number. What else will be required is dependents. You will need to update your dependents to the current state, because you could have had dependents maybe 2 weeks ago. That means they were not on SHIF, they were not on HIF, but you are required to capture them under SHIF. So that's all that is required. Why is that important? That is important because when you are trying to go and access the medical facility, you will be expected that your portal is up to date. So in as much as you want to be required to register, you will be required to update your portal just to access the funds. Yes, so maybe Tracy, I can walk them through the contributions as an employer would look like in general. So once an employer has done the registration and they log into the portal, what they will see is a couple of tabs on top. So there will be a tab for the first tab with a tab for overview. So under the tab for overview, this is where clients will be required to do one thing. The first thing they will be required to do is generate a payroll template. So a payroll template is what an employer will use to fill in the employee's details. That means their name, their KRA PIN, ID, NHIF number. Remember, we are not using SHIF number or the universal health number. We are using the NHIF number and the contribution amount and phone numbers. So that is how the template looks like. Once you fill it, go to the overview sector and upload it. So once you have uploaded, there's another step that is optional. It's not mandatory, of adding employees. So you can add employees if, for example, the next payroll cycle, you don't want to generate a blank template, you want it to be pre-filled. So you can upload your employees there. And the next time you generate a payroll template, it will be beautiful, having all the names of your employees and their details. And all you'll be required to do is update the contribution amount in case their gross pay has changed. So once you do that under overview, you'll go to the next page, which is the employees page. So under the employees page, this sector, you'll just need to do one thing. And the only thing you'll need to do is just select a submission period. So for example, we'll be filing for October. So you'll go and select a submission period as October 2024, and then you submit. That's all. Once you submit, you'll go to the next tab, which is the submission tab. So under the submission tab, this will be this is a page that shows you your entire payroll. and you can actually review it before you submit. So all you need to do is ensure that it has no errors. If it has error, it will have a column that shows you where the error is. Let's say an employee is missing a KRA PIN or an ID number, you'll be able to see it under this section. And assuming everything is well, you'll be allowed to submit. So once you submit, you will go to the next tab, which is the eSlip. The eSlip page, this is where now you'll be required to download your PRN, because this is what you will go to the bank with and pay. So once you have done that, you can consider that a done task. You are compliant and everything is in line. So you can go to the next tab, which is the transaction tab, in case you have filed for many months down the line, and you want to go back to a previous payroll cycle and see what you submitted. It will be under transaction history tab. So that's all that is required in terms of filing the contributions for SHIF by the employer. Back to you, Tracy.
Thanks, Josh. It's very, very, very insightful and comprehensive. So it looks like there's going to be both. It looks like it's one, a very proactive approach for employers to just ensure that everything there, and also a very collaborative approach between the employers and the employees to make sure the data is in and the updated records are also put within the new portal. Welcome back, Nelson. But even before we move on, and we can see your questions rolling in, please continue putting them within the Q&A function. We will address them even as we go along. So yeah, putting your questions there, we will get into them. So Nelson, we were just discussing with Joshua about the enrollment process, what it's going to look like, the registration, deductions, payroll contributions, and also just ensuring that all the information is updated and having an active phone number. That's what Joshua was just explaining to us. So even before we got here, we were just discussing, and I posed a question to you that for over 5 decades, the Kenyan government has provided health insurance through NHIF to its people, and now we are looking at a pivotal moment within the health landscape, where this is unprecedented, where now we're moving to a new health insurance regime, Social Health Insurance Fund, SHIF. So we just want to understand, maybe you need to give us some context, why the transition, why does it affect us, why does it matter, and how did we get here? Over to you, Nelson.
Great. Thank you very much, Tracy, and thank you for that question. I think it's been in the public domain that there has been a transition from the National Health Insurance Fund to the newly created SHIF, which is the Social Health Insurance Fund. And this conversation started off like close to half a decade ago. So there was a discussion around changing Kenya's general healthcare coverage from simply relying mostly on salaried individuals to sort of expanding the base of the insured individuals to people who are either salaried and also people who are not salaried. So this is what they now call the universal healthcare coverage. Now, this particular system was meant to work like how the healthcare coverage works in Rwanda, for instance. Rwanda has successfully implemented this, and there are also a number of other countries across the globe that have effected this new universal healthcare coverage. Now, that said, I think it's also important to go back to 19th of October 2023. And on this date, there were 3 particular acts that were enacted by Parliament. One of them is the Social Health Insurance Act, what you're calling the SHA. And then there is the Digital Health Act, what we call the DHA. And then there's a Primary Healthcare Act, which is the PHCA. Now, of all those 3 acts, they were supposed to take effect on the 22nd of November 2023. But unfortunately, before the implementation happened, there was someone filed a court case. And the reason why that court case was filed is because they wanted the SHA to be declared unconstitutional for, among other reasons, the lack of public participation. And as a result of that, the High Court actually made a ruling and said that the SHA, the DHA, and the PHCA, which are the acts that have been enacted in October 2023, are not going to be operational until the substantive appeal is heard, or until the entire case is heard. Now, what happened is that the Court of Appeal, the Cabinet Secretary in charge of health now appealed that decision to the Court of Appeal. And on 20th of September, which is just last month, the Court of Appeal said that because of the time it's taken for us to implement this new act or this new SHIF, it's not going to be possible to revert back to the NHIF. And as a result, we are going to go ahead and implement the new regime. And then if the substantive appeal is heard and it comes to, the Court of Appeal comes to the conclusion that this act is not okay, or that there are certain provisions in it that are constitutional, then we can revert back to the NHIF, right? So that's the decision. And as a result of that decision, it followed now that the SHIF is going to be operational. So, just for purposes of making it very clear from a legal standpoint, the Social Health Insurance Fund is not operational by dint of that decision. So any question about its legality is neither here nor there. It's now going to be operational. And then secondly, the Court of Appeal case is actually going on. So that's sort of the historical background of where we came from and what we want to achieve. Now, are there certain provisions in that act that are very controversial? Oh, yes, I agree. And we're going to discuss about them later. Over to you, Tracy.
Great. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Nelson. Yeah, it's also good that you mentioned that as it stands, which is a question that we've received as well. It's good to note that the courts have currently given a temporary nod, even as they continue to deliberate on that. So, Nelson, I'd also like to find out, you've mentioned this cuts across different sectors. We're talking private sector, public sector, informal sector. So I'd like to find out, and I'm sure the audience would also like to know, who is eligible? Is it for everybody? Is it for people and their dependents? Who gets to enroll under SHIF and gets to register and go under the process, or go through the process of what Joshua had previously explained?
Great. That's equally a very good question. So the SHA, and when I mean the SHA, I mean the Social Health Insurance Act, SHA, categorizes households into three categories. So first, there are people who are salaried, right? And that's very easy for the deduction to be made, because essentially what you need is simply for an employer to deduct the 2.75% from your gross salary. So that's an easy tell. Then secondly, there is the non-salaried household. And for the non-salaried household, there's a particular regime for them, which they have to pay a minimum of 300. Then they have to pay the SHA, annually in a lump sum before a given timeline or given deadline. And that deadline has not actually been issued. Then there's another category that has been newly created, which is for people who need financial assistance. Now, for people who need financial assistance, the county government and the Ministry of Health, or the State Department of Health, is going to be assisting them to get, help, sort of get that financial aid for them to be paying for the social health insurance fund. Now, that is sort of a little bit of a shift from how we saw it, during the NHIF regime, where during the NHIF regime, we didn't actually have, those three categories, and the payments of them were not as structured the way they are now structured under this new regime. So just to state that there is also a little bit of a controversy, and the controversy arises from the fact that this particular taxation bans, when we talk about the 2.75% and so on and so forth, were enacted in accordance with a legal notice. There's a legal notice of 2024. But now it's important to note that the Senate proceedings annulled those regulations, that were supposed to give effect to that 2.75%. But unfortunately, the Court of Appeal held that the laws will actually function, that is the SHA, the respective act, and the regulations are going to function as if the Senate did not annul those regulations. So there may be a question around, what's the basis of this 2.75%? So I'd like to clarify that that's on the basis of the legal regulations, but which were annulled by Senate, but had been confirmed by the Court of Appeal. So that's an important thing to say, in the context of this conversation. Now, for those who are not in formal employment, who just said they need to contribute on an annual basis, the percentage is still 2.75% of their gross income. Now, how you're going to determine what the gross income is also quite controversial. If I'm a salaried person, it's very easy for me to know what my gross pay is. But if I'm not a salaried person, and maybe I make an income on an irregular basis, so this month I make a certain amount, the other month I make a certain amount, how to consolidate all those amounts annually is equally subject to a lot of clarification. And I think it will be important for SHIF to give us clarification. But currently, as it stands, based on our reading of the law, there are going to be a certain set of indicators, capture various socioeconomic, of a household, and unfortunately, we don't have it's not been provided to us what the means of testing these indicators will be. So that will be still new. But what we know currently is that the minimum amount that needs to be paid by everyone, whether you're salaried or not salaried, is 300. Now, what we also know is that the percentage to be paid on your gross income is 2.75%. What we also know is that for salaried individuals, that amount is going to be deducted straight up from your salary and remitted to SHIF authority. So that we also know. And we also know that for non-salaried individuals, the payments are going to be made on a lump sum on an annual basis. And we also know that there's going to be clarification on how to determine how much a household makes.
Thanks, Nelson. So there's a question here from one of the members of our audience, and they're asking, are casual employees supposed to register under the employer or voluntary function?
Well,
now that we're on that conversation.
Okay, I will say that for all employees, if you're salaried, regardless of the amount of your salary, you should be registered as an employee for that particular company. And I think Josh would also agree with me on that.
Yes, that falls down to the definition of employee. The fact that you've termed casual as an employee, then that means they should be registered and filed for by the employer. So yeah, I agree with you, Nelson, that is quite in order.
Okay, so even as we just give people a final chance to put in their questions before we move into the Q&A session, I think it's important for us to also discuss what are the consequences of non-compliance. Joshua talked about making sure that your records are updated, that everything is up to date, that your system, that your portal and the system considers you as an active member of SHIF. So what are we looking at in terms of non-compliance? Is there non-compliance on the part of the employer, non-compliance the part of the employee based on the expectations that the employer also has to ensure that this is an active and very compliant process?
Okay, I think you can take that on. So of course, the first consequence of not paying SHIF is you'll not be able to access services. So that's sort of the immediate and most likely outcome. And then the other consequence of non-compliance, which is very hefty on an employer, is that it's actually an offense not to deduct SHIF deductions. And that offense, one, is punishable by a fine that doesn't exceed 2 million. And then two, imprisonment of certain people in your company, that's the directors of your company, of a jail term not exceeding 3 years. So that's actually a huge compliance issue that employers need to be very careful about.
Okay, thanks for that, Nelson. So I just wanted us to touch base and just to go back to registration, which Joshua was explaining earlier, was that we want to find out, what happens to the registration process? How does it work? If a company is incorporated and is functional but has no employees, do they register? if a company has different branches, which one do they use to register? What happens to, what are the modalities of the registration around this process?
Yes. So to answer your first question is, if a company has been registered and doesn't have an employee. So remember, for you to register as a company, you'll need a director. So that means that director will file as an employee under that company. So it will be virtually impossible for a company not to file because of virtue of just existing and having a director. And yeah. What was your second question?
My second question was about registration. If a company or a business has a number of branches, what happens to the registration process? Do they use the headquarters? Do they need to register all the businesses? I'm guessing obviously it's the same business, but what they're trying to ask is if it's different branches, is there a different way to approach it? And how they should go about it if that's the case?
Okay, so to answer your question first, you have to remember that you can have a company that is a mother company, which has entities. So the first thing you need to understand is if the company has its own KRA PIN, then that means it should register individually. If the entities under the mother company have KRA PINs, then that means they are independent and they should also register under SHIF independently. So each company, so the only issue is if a company has branches and those branches are not like separate entities in terms of having their own KRA PINs, then that means you don't have to register the branches because it's just one company that has many branches.
Yeah, maybe you can just add on top of what Joshua said. So each company needs to make one registration. You know, I understand that a company may have like 10 branches, and sometimes people think that these 10 branches are actually separate companies. But if, you know, one company needs to make one registration, regardless of the number of branches it has, you know, across Kenya. Now, in the context of a group, and I understand a group has, you know, holding company and many other subsidiary companies below it, then each respective company needs to make its own registration. So you won't be finding one holding company making a registration on behalf of all, you know, its companies. So as companies are thinking about, you know, structuring it, it's important to understand that each company has its own registration and has to make one registration.
Okay, thank you for that, Joshua and Nelson. I think even as we continue to comb through the questions, we also have a few questions regarding the portal, which I think Joshua had covered, but maybe you can answer some of these. So I'm not sure whether this is within your scope, but Dorothy would like to know if employees' data has not reflected on the employer portal, how do you treat the field of contribution amount, especially when you're doing a mass upload? Before the date of filing. So there's the date of filing and you're trying to do a mass upload. What happens if you're not being able to, if the system is not capturing on the employee portal?
So
employer portal.
What you mean is that the employees have not populated on the portal, on the SHA portal. So what happens is, remember, all these employees had NHIF numbers, and that is what is being used to file for social health insurance fund. So we will not need you to have us. It's called a universal health ID number. So you don't need that when it comes to filing. You just use the NHIF number. So, and your ID number. So if let's say a person just turned 18 this month, so that means that person does not have an HIF number. So what happens is that they have an ID number, and that will also be used. And it will be advisable for those people who, for example, don't have an HIF number to just register for the SHIF directly, regardless of whether the number will be used or not, just for their details to be updated under SHIF.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Maybe I can also tie into that with another question here asking, My question is on is an overview as an employer. There's a section where I'm requested to download a payroll template. What or where do I get this template, or do I have to create one?
So to answer that question, what that section means is that the payroll template is an Excel. If you click on download payroll template, an Excel sheet will be downloaded, which will have a couple of columns. The columns that will be there are first name, last name, ID number, KRA PIN, NHIF number, contribution amount, and phone number. So this is just a template that it's supposed to guide you to know what information is required upon filing. So just fill that payroll template, download it, fill it, and use it to file for your employees.
All right, thank you, Joshua. Maybe I can also present this question about which appears to be a very common question, in fact, about the transition from NHIF to SHIF. Do they need to obtain new SHIF numbers, or do the NHIF numbers automatically switch to SHIF numbers? These are people who are currently preparing to run the October payroll, and they'd like to know how to go about that.
Yes. So the employees will be given it's not a SHIF, it's called a universal health ID number. Once you register, that's what you get, a universal health ID number. It's not mandatory, and you don't need it when filing, as long as you have your ID, your KRA PIN, and the NHIF number. For those who don't have NHIF number, KRA PIN and ID will work. And I think I've already talked about this, and I think we'll create a blog where you can find more information regarding this.
Yeah, Joshua, that's a good idea. Let's pick that up after this call and ensure that happens. So maybe speaking a bit on compliance from our compliance guru, Nelson. What about what of non-compliance for self-employed people? What does that look like? Is it something they need to be concerned about? Is there any workaround around that kind of situation? Hi, Nelson, I think you're on mute.
Oh, yes, I was sorry. So saying, the first effect of non-compliance certainly is you'll not be able to access the benefits that have been provided by SHIF. Whether or not the benefits are adequate is, a story of another day, but we can discuss about it. But generally, the other effect of non-compliance, I think I've mentioned it, is that there is actually a fine that will be levied on anyone who will not comply. And I'd said it's 2 million Kenya shillings, a fine not exceeding 2 million Kenya shillings, or imprisonment, not exceeding 3 years. How they'll be able to effect it on unsalaried people, considering how our country is largely informal, is equally something that we'll await to see. But generally, those are the two effects of non-compliance.
All right, thank you. Maybe Joshua and Nelson, could you tackle another common question that we're seeing here about insurance tax relief? Is that applicable? Is there anything that we need to discuss about the relief that's, if any, that's going to apply under SHIF?
Okay. So yes, I understand that NHIF had an insurance relief of 1.5 of the NHIF amount. So what happened is that to answer that question, the SHIF itself is not explicit on whether there is a relief or not. And to answer this question, I'll have to just take you back to the Income Tax Act, Section 31. And I think this is the field where Nelson jumps in. So where it's specific on the things that attract an insurance relief. That is a life insurance policy, education policy, and a health insurance. So SHIF being a health insurance under the as per the Income Tax Act, that means yes, it's eligible for the insurance relief. But my good friend Nelson will talk more on that.
Okay. Thanks, Joshua. So one, for relief to be granted, in Kenya, there has to be an explicit provision in the Income Tax Act. So if you look at the provisions of Section 31 of the Income Tax Act, there is actually an insurance relief when people contribute towards the National Health Insurance Fund. So there has been certain thought leaders who have the opinion that, in fact, the tax relief that's provided for under Section 31 applies not only to NHIF, but to anybody or authority that acquires the same responsibilities of NHIF. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is, of course, that since SHIF is not provided for in the Income Tax Act, then there's no tax relief. But I think in as much as we will need to clarify this further based on the discussions we're having with SHIF, our view is that there's actually an insurance relief on this SHIF. But of course, we'll have to get back to you with the exact specifics of how it's going to be computed. And I believe after this call, we can just have a blog and write that down. But we expect an imminent communication from SHIF in this particular regard of the tax relief.
Great. Yeah. So maybe also tying into that, we have a question from Michael, and he's asking, they have a number of foreign residents who work for their company. They have passports and the alien cards are currently being processed. So they'd like to find out, how do they register on the SHA portal? It doesn't allow them to register. So is there any solution for them? Is there a recourse? Is there something that they can explore to be able to onboard their foreign employee?
Okay, before Joshua jumps on that, the SHIF is applicable to Kenyan citizens and to people who've actually stayed in Kenya, non-citizens who've actually stayed in Kenya. I think it's for a period of 12 months. I'll have to confirm that particular period in which you have to stay in Kenya before you're eligible for registration with SHIF. But maybe, Joshua, as you're jumping into the question, you also need to take that into consideration.
Yes, I believe the period you're looking for is 12 months, if I'm not wrong. So if, for example, you're trying to register under SHIF and you're getting an error, I would personally recommend you to just visit any SHIF offices, or you can just walk to what was previously NHIF, their offices, and they will assist you on the registration. There's no clear answer to that, but that will be the best solution for you.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. I think I've also noted here a lot of complaints regarding employees and both employers alike are not being able to find the information on the portal. This transition and migration has definitely come with a lot of challenges, this being one of them. So as Joshua has suggested, maybe see if you can walk in, send an email, or drop into the offices and see how you can get that resolved. At this point, unfortunately, Workpay is not able to advise on why some information is not being able to be seen on their systems, because it might be a technical issue, but we'll be there to assist you run payroll once that is sorted out. So Joshua, question for you. Are bonus payments subject to deduction?
Yes, remember these ones are considered wages. So yeah, your entire gross. It forms part of your gross pay. So yes, it's subjected to social health insurance fund deduction.
Yeah, but also think, Josh, you can also clarify on, the non-current payments that someone may be eligible to. Like, if you receive a discretionary bonus, will that be subject to SHIF. I actually think it's not that clear cut, but anyway, you can let us know. But I don't think it's that clear cut.
It's not clear cut, but remember, once you mention the word gross, anything that sums up to gross, that means your one-time bonus, your overtime, your leave pay, and all that. It forms part of your gross pay. It will be subjected to SHIF. So this one is different from the affordable housing levy. So I get where you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay.
For the affordable housing levy, KRO are a bit explicit on that, and I hope with this maybe we can see some amendments done, and just to cushion employees, salaried employees, to be specific.
Okay, so we have a very interesting question here from Michael. He's asking what about if I have a company where he's a director, but he's also an employee? What happens in that case? How does he go about registration? What does he declare? What does he not declare?
So that will go down to how they operate. Is this director being paid a one-time dividend, or at the end of the year, or actually does he have a director's fee, or which is paid, let's say, quarterly or whatever? The third option is the director being paid a salary? So as you can see, all these are household incomes, and all of them will be subjected to SHIF at the point in which the director earns them. So regardless of the formulation, at the end of the day, they'll check for your income and subject it to tax, whether it's a dividend you have earned, whether it's a director's fee or a salary.
Okay, so maybe I can also sort of just expound on that question just a little bit. So SHIF as a deduction is based on the gross pay. If you're a salaried person. So if you're not salaried but you're a director and you derive value from the company through, let's say, an interest on a loan or dividends, then in that case, the employer will not charge the gross pay, to SHIF. Maybe that's what Michael is trying to ask. It's only gross pay if you're salaried, but if you're not salaried, if you only derive it from dividends, then you apply automatically to the non-salaried segment of the population. I believe that could be what Michael wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Nelson. It was important for you to lay that out. What about part-time? What about temporary workers, part-time employees? How is that considered?
Joshua, you.
Oh, let me take that. So this is a similar case with being a casual, whether you're a part-time, as long as the employee gives you a salary or a wage. Remember, for part-time employee, they are given wages, and for casual is wages as well, and the rest is salaries. So yes, you still have to withhold 2.7% of the remuneration.
All right. So even as I know we have another 10 minutes to go through, so maybe we can take a few more questions. We have one member of our audience asking, you have mentioned that by virtue of being registered on NHIF, everyone's data was migrated to SHIF. Now, if an employer had not pre-registered and the data was migrated, should they have received the Universal Health ID automatically? Or what and how are they being prompted to update their SHA portal?
So if somebody has not pre-registered with NHIF, I believe that is the question.
Yes.
Yes. So for such individuals, what will happen is that they'll have to register under SHIF, where they will be given a universal health ID number. But remember, upon filing, that won't be used. So upon filing, the employer will use the KRA PIN and the ID number, and that should work for such an individual. And we don't expect there to be any problem upon submission of the contribution.
Okay, I think the fear was also a fear of being earmarked as not having been non-compliant before. So thank you for mentioning. And even as we were looking at and even as we continue to discuss the historic change from NHIF to SHIF, Nelson, there's a question here from Pauline, and she's asking, comparing the benefits of SHIF and NHIF. NHIF had more benefits than SHIF. So how are the people benefiting? What's in it for the people? What's in it for the Kenyans?
Well, I think I'm also in the bandwagon of asking what's the benefit. But to be very honest with you, the benefits are there on the portal. Are they better? Are they worse? It's a very subjective question. It's a very subjective question. I don't think they're better, but I think everyone has their own opinion. The government has its own opinion about how good the benefits are, and of course the beneficiaries have their own opinion. So in my view, just to give a view, it's not a legal view, so no legal advice etc. But I don't think they're better than NHIF. Yeah, but they're actually there on the SHA portal if you want to go and access them.
Yeah, that's a very safe answer.
Where they can find the tariff act that will show them the benefits under the primary health care and the social health insurance fund.
Thanks for that, Joshua and Nelson. Nelson, since you're speaking about the legality of this, James would like to know, are there any legal proceedings challenging this? Maybe you can give him an update on what the life cycle of this navigation or this transition will look like, where we've come from, where we are at now. I know right now it's at the Court of Appeal. So maybe you can talk a bit about that, because I know a lot of Kenyans want to know, is this thing illegal? Why are we even discussing it in the first place? What does that look like? And the courts have stated a number of things here. So maybe you can touch on that a bit, just for people to have some knowledge about why it landed in the courts in the first place and what's been happening there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So just to reiterate on what I'd actually said, is that this act was enacted in October 2023. It was due for implementation sometime in November, but before then there was a case at the High Court. The High Court declared this act, this Social Health Care Act, unconstitutional, and then the Cabinet Secretary in charge of health appealed to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal stayed the decision of the High Court. That means that in the meantime, before the Court of Appeal determines whether or not this particular act is constitutional, the SHIA Act will actually take effect. So it's on that basis that the Ministry of Health has now proceeded to give a notice to employees and employers that the SHIF has now taken effect. So where we are at the moment is that there's a Court of Appeal case that's going on that's subject to determination. Of course, it may go either way. It may go the way of it's constitutional, so let's proceed. It may also go the way of it's not constitutional, it's unconstitutional, and as a result of that, we revert back to NHIF. So that's where we are at the moment. So to answer your question, is it legal? Is it currently as it stands, is it legal and should it take effect? Yes, it is legal. Yes, the Court of Appeal has given the green light for it to proceed. So if your employer goes ahead and deducts it, they actually have the legal backing, under the laws of Kenya. So that would be my simple answer to you.
Amazing, Nelson. Thank you for justifying that and for providing a lot of comfort for our audience and people who are listening in. So maybe as we move towards another section, we can probably discuss beneficiaries. How are beneficiaries going to register even though they're not the primary contributor? How do they check on their details? Are they able to access the same kind of services? What's needed for the beneficiaries? I know we've been seeing a lot of news and information saying that some of the premiums being given or some of the limits are going to be applicable to a household and not an individual. So assuming there are beneficiaries in that household, what does that look like for registration, for transition for them as well from NHIF to SHIF, keeping in mind that these are not the primary contributors within the scheme?
Joshua, you want to take that?
Sorry, Tracy, could you kindly repeat?
No problem. I was saying I wanted us to move into, or I was thinking we can move into a different section where we can briefly discuss beneficiaries. So this there's a question here from Medlin asking, a beneficiary who's not a contributor, are they supposed to register with SHIF? So I was asking I was trying to just look at the information around the beneficiaries and what the information that's out there that's been presented, where we're seeing some limits being improvised or being utilized within households. For example, we're seeing dental is being covered for a whole household where there are actually other beneficiaries who are not the primary contributors. So these beneficiaries, are they having the same services? Do they access the same benefits? How do they register? How do they transition? Are they enrolling differently? And how do they verify that in fact been registered on the SHA portal?
So maybe to answer that question, we need to differentiate between a beneficiary and a dependent. So for a beneficiary, it's anybody who has registered and has under the dependents under that person was registered. So remember all these packages, if you can check the SHIF Tariff Act, you'll see it's per household. So a household could have the primary contributor and the dependents under that person. So what happens is that the entire household here enjoys, for example, if dental has been set at, let's say, 2,000, if that household utilizes the 2,000, that's it. So you can't say that the primary contributor has 2,000 and the child has 2,000. No, it's per household. Yes. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. But how do they? So is it automatic migration? Is there an enrollment process that's different for them?
So what happens is that I said for salaried employees, the transition was automatic, but each and every employee is supposed to go to the portal and update the details. So amongst the details that one is supposed to update is the dependents, so your children and your spouse, etc., or anybody who is under the age of 25 under your household. So you are supposed to update it on the portal, and that will ensure that they become beneficiaries of the SHIF.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Cecilia is asking for consultants. How do they treat SHIF? How do they go about it? And how is it? How do they onboard?
So for consultants, remember these are termed as non-salaried. So it's just like any other non-salaried person. Just take your ID number, KRA PIN, go to the employee portal. It's called afyayangu.go.ke and register. If you are a consultant who does not get salaries, what you get is the normal fees. So you'll just have to register as an unsalaried personnel household.
All right. There's also a recurring question here about employer contributions. Are there any employer contributions? What does that look like? Maybe you can touch. I know you had previously touched on that, but maybe you can go over that again.
So personally, I'll let Nelson answer this because we have debated about it, and it has become a more of a legal matter, which it's his field. So I'll let Nelson answer this one.
Okay. So just a very simple answer. I know Joshua has totally disagreed with me on this, but my understanding is there are no employer contributions. It's a purely employee contributions because it's an employee's household, and this universal health coverage does not recognize an employer as a household. As a household is, it could be Joshua and his wife. They're salaried or not salaried or need financial aid. The employer is out of this. So my understanding, and that many professionals at the moment, is it's only an employee deduction. There is no employer contribution. But of course, Joshua has his own consternations about it as well.
Yeah, Joshua, let's hear yours. We're curious to hear about yours as well.
That one we'll have to discuss it on another webinar. But for this one, Nelson answers takes the day.
All right. Okay. So speaking of payments, how are payments made? I've also noted here there's a couple of questions asking about how are payments made. Are they made by M-Pesa? Are they still using the same pay bill number? Some have asked if they have to go visit a bank, do an RTGS. Are you able to speak on how this payments, the seamless payments will be done at the end of the month once the remittance begins?
Sorry, I was speaking on it. So currently on the website, there's no, they have not indicated the payment platforms that shall be used to make the contributions. But I believe upon generation of a PRN, so once you file, you generate the PRN, it will have the instructions. That's basically what we expect. But most likely they just use the banking system, M-Pesa, for those whose limits are not beyond what can be paid through M-Pesa. Yeah, let's hope they have updated their platforms to cater for all these payment channels, gateways.
Thank you, Joshua. I can also see a number of our clients are also on this webinar. Thank you for joining. We note that you're also asking about Workpay system. I think you can reach out to us after this call, and we'll ensure that you're sorted out as promptly as possible. So I think we can begin to wrap up on what has been an extremely insightful discussion. Personally, I've also been able to learn a number of things. Thank you, Joshua and Nelson, for taking us through a wonderful afternoon of learning. So this brings us to the end of today's session. A heartfelt thank you to both Joshua and Nelson for their wonderful presentation. We hope that this has provided a clear understanding of what the migration looks like, especially from a compliance perspective, which is why we are here. So I hope you've been able to see also the differences between employers, employees, the implications, the benefits, and whatnot. Please also remember that Workpay is your #1 HR and payroll solutions company. So please reach out to us. These are some of the things and benefits of being part of our client base. We do advisory for you. We have Joshua, who's here, who looks at payroll within the team internally, and Nelson also looks at the legality. So please feel free to reach out to us after this call, and someone will be assigned to assist you. So I think if there are no other questions, we can mark that as the end of this discussion. Thank you Thank you once again for your time, for your participation. We also wish you the best as you navigate this new thing that we're all trying to figure out, and have a wonderful rest of the day from wherever you are. Thank you for joining, and we wish you the best.
Tracy, you there? Hello, Tracy?
Hey, Nelson.
It?